Hey, what's up, guys? I am back with another Planeswalker review. And yeah, first of all, thank you again to Oktagon for letting me test out this Planeswalker. I know it's available for real life money right now, so we are going to figure out if it will be worth it for you. So, yeah, following the same format we did for my Tyvar review, I'm just going to go ahead and compare her to other black and white walkers that I own, excluding Dakon because I don't think that's fair. He's a tricolor and pretty much at this point kind of universally regarded as the best planeswalker in the game right now, and it probably will be until further notice. So let's get that out of the way. So first, let's go ahead and move on to seeing what she gets when you pick her up. So this is how she starts at level 1. If you want to at this point pause and check out her abilities here, let me go ahead and just go ahead and zoom in on some of these. So if you want to just go ahead and pause during this part here so you can really see what her abilities do. Feel like that's probably better than me going through and just reading out everything that she does. But as you can see, her mana bonuses, where they start, how they end up. So this is the deck that she starts with here. Your free rare for picking her up is Phyrexian Arena, which is actually a really good card. I like it a lot for black especially, but yeah, anybody who could use it, I think it's a pretty solid card. And so it's basically you draw a card at the beginning of your turn, you lose 3 life, and gain 6 mana on that card, which can really help if you're dealing with a creature and you happen to pull some removal. You can pair it with, something that will surveil so you know what you're going to get next. So that's always cool too. So yeah, other than that, let's move on to comparing her to the other black and white planeswalkers that I have. So these are the other planeswalkers I have in this color pie. I got Original Kaya, Kaya 1, Daxos the Return, and Sorin Grim Nemesis. So that's a blast from the past, isn't it? Start with their HP, their hit points. So between 112, 113, and 116, that more or less might as well just be the same number that you start with. It's not going to make a huge difference either way. I feel like there are some times where 1 to 3 hit points will make a difference, but usually, not all the time, but usually that means you're probably about to lose if you're getting down to those numbers. Sorin, it's a little different. Sorin has the worst HP in the game, I believe. I think maybe starter Nissa might have the same amount of HP to start with, but really bad, makes them really difficult to want to use in any serious capacity. I sometimes will use him for fun little combo decks that can utilize his abilities, but really rarely. He's just not a very viable planeswalker at this point. Mana gains. Mana gains can be really important with a planeswalker because they can sometimes make or break what their utility really is when you're actually out in the field using them. So Kaya Intangible Slayer has good mana gains. She gets +5 on her colors, +2 on blue, but -2 on green and red, which sometimes can really mess you up. But for the most part, I really like those high mana gains, even if they come at the cost of low gains on other colors. We get Kaya Urzov Usurper. I personally think that hers is probably the best mana gains out of all the ones that I have here, just because she gets just normal mana gains on her off colors, except for green, which is -2, but not a huge deal against either one because you're usually not trying to match green or red anyway. Let's see. Daxos. Daxos is a little bit more spread out, a little bit more evenly. One less mana on his on color gains, but only -1 on green and red. I personally would rather just have the extra mana on black and white because that's what you're going to go for anyway. And then Sorin Grim Nemesis, I don't remember him having +4 on black and white. Unless they just like stealthily buffed him, but I don't know. I could be wrong about that. I just went with what I saw when I loaded him up to check this out for the video. So I personally would rather get more mana on everything else at the expense of having less mana gains on off-color matches. But that's just me. I don't remember him getting +4. I always thought it was +3. I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you guys have always had him be +4 on black and white. Deck load. It can also mean the difference between being able to create the deck you really want and not. So I like that they don't really give us bad deck loads on new planeswalkers anymore. I think it's a huge quality of life improvement. As you can see with Sorin Grim Nemesis, I personally like having more spells to play around with than creatures. So there's not any reason you would ever use 7 creatures in a deck. So it's kind of stupid to even give us that amount to use. I'd rather them just give us less creature slots and more spell and support slots, because that's what really you're gonna, with the way this game works, you can only have 3 creatures at a time anyway, so you guys know. So that's why 10 creatures, 5 spells, 5 supports is kind of a ridiculous deck load at this point. But nobody's really using Sorin Grim Nemesis. I haven't seen him used in standard in forever. So here's the meat of all these planeswalkers, their loyalty abilities. And let's just go through and talk about each one of them here. So Kaya Intangible Slayer, her first ability I almost never use. I think I've only ever used it once, and that's because I was already in full control of the game, of the match that I was in, and so I had nothing else to use other than her first ability. So I just don't think it does enough for you to help you along. If it like exiled your opponent's library or even your library, it would be more useful because of her second ability, which we'll get to. But losing 6 life, you gaining 6 life, you gain hexproof until the beginning of your next turn. It's very rare that any of those things happening will mean the difference between you winning and losing. So I just don't think it's an ability that's worth spending loyalty on. And then Kaya Orzhov Usurper, Kaya 1, we can just call her now. Create improved burial rights token. Whenever a card enters your opponent's graveyard from anywhere, it's exiled instead. And if that card is a creature card, you gain 1 life, then your opponent loses 1 life. Destroy the top 6 cards of your opponent's library. Most of the time, that's not doing a lot for you other than helping with certain things, such as anybody using their graveyard instead of exile. But there are some very fringe cases that isn't that useful, or you'd rather destroy from their library and put it into the graveyard. But it's synergistic with her third ability, so it's not that bad. But on its own, it doesn't do a lot for you. Other than like if you're facing a planeswalker whose abilities or their deck is relying on putting things into your graveyard, or you do a lot of times if you're running against an Angel of Suffering or something like that. That's one. Going against New Liliana, that's another. So it's definitely got its uses. But Daxos, his first ability, is the reason that you would use Daxos, which is creating a greater Eidolon of Longing token. I believe at the beginning of each turn, He buffs himself according to the amount of experience points you have. But really what people mostly use him for is enabling combos, such as grabbing like a Curse of Vitality for that combo. But yeah, fetch the first aura or enchantment card from your library, and if you're playing with only one aura or one enchantment that you're relying on to set up a combo that will win a game for you, is the reason most people use Daxos. But he's a good solid planeswalker other than that. And then Sorin Grim Nemesis, it has probably the weakest ability of everybody here. Gain 4 life and 2 mana per creature you control. So you have to have 3 creatures on the board. You're gaining 12 life and 6 mana, but that's such a small case that you're relying on that at that point. If you have 3 creatures on the board, you're probably in some amount of control, so it's not probably doing a lot for you. So I think his is probably the most useless ability out of everybody's here. But Kaya is not that far behind. With Kaya Intangible Slayer is not that far behind. Loyalty ability 2. So this is really the reason to pick up Kaya, if for any reason you want to, is because her second ability is quite good. So you draw up to 4 cards, and that's already pretty nice. But the last 4 cards in your hand gain mana equal to 2 plus the number of creature cards in all exiles. So even if you have no creatures in your exile, you're getting 2 mana on each of those cards. And if you're playing a relatively cheap deck, that's going a long way towards filling your hand. And then it's not really that hard to put a lot of creatures in exiles. There are ways to build for that. So also, you get to create 4 white spirit tokens, and it's always nice to have the ability to create your own creatures just out of your abilities. So there are ways, obviously, to put a lot of creatures into exiles. So that's one interesting way of doing it. So there are a lot of different ways of putting creature cards in your exile. For one, there's Jaleva, which will definitely spotlight in a deck later. And then, there's ways like Savior of Olenbach, all that sort of stuff. So Soul Herder, well, actually that takes creatures out of exiles, but yeah, there's a lot of different ways of doing it. You just like chuck them out of your hand and into your exile. That's also one way. So yeah, we'll definitely spotlight that ability more when we get into her gameplay. And then Kaya Orzhov Usurper, exile the first opposing creature that costs 13 or less. If you can't, exile opposing non-land support that costs 13 or less. And create 4 Orzhov Spirit tokens. Not a bad ability for sure. Being able to exile, untargeted exile is pretty useful. It's one ability that I tend to use a lot with her. And just pretty solid all around. Speaking of also a fairly solid ability, pick one of the first 4 cards from your graveyard, fetch that card, then the last aura and the last creature card in your hand gain X mana. X is equal to your experience points. I guess I would give this one the thumbs down. I know I didn't do that for this screen here because I didn't think any of these are bad abilities. But this is probably the one I use the least when it comes to using Daxos. I just don't use it that much. I don't build around the graveyard with Daxos most of the time, so that usually doesn't do a lot for me. And I just don't tend to go for this one. I think his other abilities are a lot more useful. And then Sorin Grim Nemesis, this is one that I probably use the most when it comes to him. Summon a support with when each creature you control attacks, you gain 4 life. Which is just okay on its own, but in conjunction with this third ability, it tends to help out a lot. But it's really more about Sorin's third ability and just using life gain from other means to pump up your creatures, and we'll get into that in a sec. Loyalty ability 3. Kaya Intangible Slayer. Exile target opposing creature. which is pretty good. And oh yeah, I forgot to say that that's something I need to add to these Planeswalker reviews in the future. How much these loyalty abilities cost. I'll try and make a mental note of that. Because her second and third ability, I believe, costs the same, which is kind of cool. Um, because they're not like super amazing abilities, either one. But the fact that they only cost 12 loyalty each is pretty nice. So exile target opposing creature. If that creature has one or more evergreens, the first spirit card you control gains each of these evergreens that card has. And I just didn't feel like putting the giant list of evergreens here, but you can go back and see which ones they're talking about. Most of them. Otherwise, create 6 white spirit tokens. So basically, I don't really play with a lot of spirit creatures anyway. I mean, Faithbound Judge, we will. The times I've used this, I haven't really had both a spirit and a creature with a bunch of evergreens in play. I haven't found that much use for that part of the ability. But exiling target opposing creature, then creating 6 white spirit tokens is not a bad ability at all. Kaya Orzhov Usurper. Move all cards from each graveyard to your opponent's exiled card zone. Deal damage to your opponent's planeswalker equal to the number of cards in their exiled card zone, then gain that much life. So this is a lot of the reason that people use Kaya 1 in order to pump up that ability and do some creatureless wins with that. Just doing things to wreck your opponent's graveyard and put them all into the exile, and then using that against them. And there's really nothing they can do about it because it's not a lot you can do to take out massive amounts of cards from your exile. So it putting cards in your opponent's exile, if you have the ability to build for it, can really help you win quite definitively. So Daxos, I think, is probably the most useful ability of all of our planeswalkers we're talking about here. You gain 10 points, then each opposing creature gets minus X, and you gain X life. X is equal to your experience points. So a lot of people use this as like kind of a pseudo board wipe, because a lot of creatures, if you're able to stack this over and over again, you're just going to be decimating your opposing creature's abilities. It's kind of a decent board wipe, and then you're gaining a lot of life back. So a lot of people like to use this ability as well and build for it. And then Sorin's just so reliant on creatures that it's not a great standalone ability. So you got to have a lot going for you to make this a really good ability, but it's still a pretty solid ability. You create a support win, you gain life, each of your creatures gain +4 +0. It would have been even better if you get +4 +4, but yeah, it's still a fun ability to use and build for, but Sorin's just such a outdated walker at this point that it's just not really worth using him for this ability. So that's the only reason he gets a thumbs down, but it's not the worst ability in the world. And yeah, so that is my breakdown for her compared to other planeswalkers that I own in this color space. So she kind of ends up in third place, I feel like, as far as everything goes, stacked up to other planeswalkers here. So that's something to think about when you're deciding if you want to spend money on her. But it really comes down to how you feel about using her. And I'm going to spotlight some decks here that I've created that I like, but I'll let you decide for yourself if it's worth it for you to spend the money on buying her. All right. All right. So first I'll share with you my for fun deck. And that is, I want to build around mites, the Phyrexian Mite tokens. And because of that, I'm trying to build something in black and white that will give us the ability to stack up toxin tokens, because right now I think that that's the most fun new meta. If you watch my last video of my day one using Toxin, it's already proving to be a really strong mechanic, and it's probably going to be really scary to face in coalition events. We'll see how it changes the landscape from here on out, but this is what I'm doing. When your first creature attacks, create a Phyrexian Might token. If you don't remember what the Might tokens do, let's look at them. It's a token, it can't block, but it's unblockable, and it has Toxin. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if this creature has 3 or more reinforcement, it gains Toxic 3 until end of turn. This creature has 5 or more reinforcements, it gains Toxic 5 until end of turn. And this creature has 9 or more reinforcement, it gets Toxic 7 until end of turn. So that's already going to be stacking up toxic tokens as long as you're able to attack with it. So when this creature deals combat damage to your opponent's Planeswalker, this creature loses X reinforcements. X is the number of opposing creatures with power 1 or greater and without can't block. So, yeah, most creatures you're going to have more than power 0. So, and most of them can block. Or without can't block means they can block, right? Okay. Mondrak Glory Dominus was a creature that I got for day one. And so the reason I like it is when you create a token card under your control, reinforce it. So you're getting 2 for 1 when you attack with the Flesh Cutter. Vraska's Fall creates a Toxin token, and it's a pretty solid removal card. Destroy an opposing Vanguard support or destroy the first opposing creature. Anoint with Afflict, pretty cheap removal spell. It exiles target creature. And it's not that hard to get a lot of Phyrexian toxins going. So otherwise, exile target creature with base mana value 11 or less. Phyrexian Arena, we talked about that earlier. Bladehold War Whip, this is going to give double strike. So it'll be nice to be able to use it with a Phyrexian Might to do extra toxins. Skrell's Hive is one I just picked up. Really neat card. At the beginning of your turn, you lose 3 life and create a Phyrexian Might token. If your opponent controls a card named Phyrexian Toxin with 3 or more reinforcements, your creatures with Toxic gain lifelink until the beginning of your next turn. So that's going to be giving your little mites lifelink, hopefully. Healer of the Pride. So this card is mostly in here to take advantage of the mites you're going to be creating and anything else that you cast. And it's just a way to both gain life and convert some extra gems to white. So if you don't know how good Healer of the Pride is, just watch a few of my other videos that spotlight her, because she is amazing, especially for the amount of mana that she costs. And then Angel Fire Ignition will give you that extra lifelink. Even though I throw them on Phyrexian Mites mostly to put them in the first creature slot, because it'll give them vigilance, but it'll also give them lifelink and haste and trample, even though they're unblockable, so it doesn't matter. But that part of it, but the rest of it is good. And then Painful Quandary, because people figured out that every time you create a toxin token, it's like you're casting a card. So whenever your opponent casts a card, your opponent discards the last card without mana from their hand. If they can't reinforce the support, then your opponent loses X life. X is the support shield. So in play, when you hit with that 7 toxin might, you're going to be basically triggering this guy 7 turns, or 7 times that turn, which can be devastating, and I want to show you that real quick. Alright, so this deck can sometimes take a while to set up. Skrell's Hive and Heal of the Pride, so that'll be good. Should be some synergy there, yeah. So we lose that life, but gain it right back. by putting a creature on the battlefield. And then if we're at full life, then we just go ahead and start converting gems to white because of enlist. So that's cool. Don't need another Healer of the Pride yet. Rather save it in case it gets wiped away. It's a pretty vulnerable creature, so it's definitely bound to happen here and there. Painful Quandary. Let's see if we can get that on the board. That would have been nice to have in the last battle I played against. So the last one was a Joda Rocco loop. So I didn't include it in this video. Okay, Painful Quandary, Annoying with Affliction. Goes down, which will be good for us. Exiled a creature, so next time I use her second ability, we're going to get something going on. Okay, so here's the Painful Quandary going off. Because I had 3 toxins on her, or on the Might, then I was able to trigger it that many times. So now you see how that works. Let's see. Try and get enough loyalty to exile Xander. It's much better to do that. So yeah, it's just extra damage we're doing if they don't have a card with no mana in it. So we're creating mites when we attack. Let's give vigilance to put them in the bottom spot. Ouch. So that was cool. You didn't get to see most of the deck, but that is how Painful Quandary works. So I was glad that I got to show you that part of it. And yeah, next battle I'll show you a deck that takes advantage of her abilities more. That one was more built for trying to get the Toxin token high, but I'll show you one that just wins games easier, and it really showcases her second ability. Okay, this one has a lot more mythics in it, but it's really trying to build around her abilities. So, what do we got? We got Faithbound Judge. It's a spirit, so that's obviously going to help with a lot of things. And then the Sinner's Judgment token is just devastating, and it's going to hopefully help us get our loyalty to be able to cast her second ability every turn. Jaleva is getting us spells, of course, but it's also putting a ton of cards in our exile, which is also going to help with her second ability. Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, you all know why that's great, but also the Heroism Emblem just exiles opposing cards, so that's going to put more things in their exile. Vanish into Eternity is a new removal spell. Untargeted exile, so that's great. And if the last card in your opponent's exile is a support card, you gain 9 mana. So that's possible support removal as well. Angel of Suffering is going to put a bunch of stuff in to our graveyard. Hopefully Faithbound Judge as well. Mask of Gristlebrand is just good lifelink, but also if you trigger it and you have an Angel of Suffering on the battlefield, it's going to put a lot of stuff in our graveyard. Calamity's Wake, just go ahead and exile all cards from all graveyards. So if you have that Angel of Suffering putting a ton of things into your graveyard, that's going to do that. And then disable all support and spell cards in each player's hand until end of turn, and then exile this card. So it's got flash, so that also will help with certain things. Probably pretty rare that will actually do a lot for you. It's more likely to hurt you than help you, even if you use it during flash. And then Soul Transfer is targeted exile. So then if you control an artifact and enchantment, I don't think we have any artifacts. Mask of Gristlebrand is not an artifact, which for some reason I don't understand why it's not. But anyhow, let's go ahead and show you this deck because it's pretty damn fun. Let's see if we can get a nice battle going where we dominate. Got some battles that were fun. They were a little hard fought. I don't feel like they really showed how well this deck can do. Jaleva, if I could get. Dang it. Already an annoying battle. Get 9 mana because it was a support we got rid of, so that's cool. Let's see, will we be able to keep a Teferi Hero of Dominaria on the board long enough to do anything with it? So far, so good. Okay. I'll save that Calamity's Wake. Creatures are in our exile. Not many. How many are in there? Got 1, so we'll only get 3 mana if we use our ability right now. However, if I do this, now we got 2 and 3. So we'll get 5 mana. Exile our hand here, or exile our graveyard. Now we're getting 8 mana per turn, or per usage of our second ability, so that's pretty good. Keep it stacking. Now we're just going to be permanently exiling as long as our fairy stays on the board. So far, so good. And he's just not playing well. Old Gregory. Nothing to soul transfer. So let's just keep it moving. Soul transfer. Put mana in our cards. Got a nice fat spirit going. Jaleva. So now we're going to have tons of stuff in our exile. Don't really need her around, actually. Everyone else is doing just fine. Then we got a Sinner's Judgment token down as well. So we don't need that. So now we got how many creatures in our exile? 51 cards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 18, 19, 20. And then all these other creatures. That was just the mythics and all the rares in the exile. So enough to power anything in our deck. So pretty much at this point, we're going to be drawing cards, 4 cards with full mana every turn, which is pretty amazing. And exactly why I said her second ability was great. But once Jaleva and Faithbound Judge rotate out of standard, what will we do? We'll just have to exile stuff the old-fashioned way unless we get some awesome new cards. But oh well. So is life. And there you go. So that is how you can dominate with Kaya Intangible Slayer. And grabbing 4 cards a turn with mana, with full mana, can definitely help with objectives. So she definitely has some use in coalition play if you want to use her for that sort of thing, and just fill up with a lot of exile spells. Just build with a lot of removal and control in mind. And yeah, so she's pretty viable in that way. All right. So what do you guys think? Based on what you saw today, would you pick her up for money? Would you wait to buy her for crystals? Would you pass on her entirely? Let me know in the comments, and let me know if you guys are planning on grabbing her, what you plan on doing with her. Is there some deck idea that you have in mind that you are already looking forward to using? All right. Well, thanks again to Oktagon, and thanks to everybody for watching. This is mostly a labor of love, so all the likes, comments, and views are really what I do this for, and sharing what I've learned on the Discord and all that. So, yeah. All right. Till the next one, which will be a review of the Phyrexian Vindicator, which they also let me try out, and I'll be giving my thoughts on that card, which is really fun. And I'll show you how and why.